So I'm going to start by putting the legs on the charcoal bowl. The assembly is exactly the same as the current Smoky Mountain Cooker. Each leg is attached with 2 screws, 2 flat washers, and 2 nuts. So here's the assembled charcoal bowl. One of the things I don't quite understand still is that little tab that I showed you earlier on the leg. As you can see here, it's flush right up against the bottom of the bowl. I don't quite see how I'm supposed to attach that, that catch pan underneath here. Having put the legs in place, perhaps I'm supposed to do that before I put the legs in place. But even if I do, it looks like the pan would be just pretty much right up against the bottom of the bowl here. So unlike, on a 22-inch kettle where there's quite a large distance between the bowl and this catcher, there wouldn't be here. So I am at a point now where I'm kind of wishing I did have an owner's manual to understand if I kind of messed up here, if I should have put the catcher in place along with the legs, or if I'm supposed to bend these tabs down, or exactly what's going on here. Something else I noticed here on the charcoal bowl is that one of the 3 dampers is very loose. You do see this sometimes on existing Smoky Mountain cookers. It has to do with how tightly it's riveted in place. If I spin this around to the other side and do a comparison, you can see that this damper is much more difficult to open and close, so it has a much firmer action to it, and when you set it, it easily will stay in place without moving. So that's a little quality issue in terms of how this one damper has been attached to this bowl. So I spent a few minutes looking at the legs and this catcher that they provided. I think this catcher was supposed to slip over those tabs on the legs before I tightened the legs down. So I'm going to loosen up the legs and see if I can get this catcher in place. So I wasn't able to get this catcher in place by just loosening those bottom screws. I had to remove all 3 screws in order to pull the leg out far enough to slip the catcher over the tab on the leg. And I put the screws and the nuts back in place. It looks to me like this is more of a drip catcher than it is an ash catcher. My guess is that this is an attempt to eliminate the need to have to put a pan under the cooker to protect your patio or your deck from the drips that sometimes come out of these dampers. It would roll down the bowl and be caught in this catcher. The catcher does have a small drainage hole in the middle, so it's still possible that you could have something come out of that catcher and drip down below. The one thing I'm a little bit confused about, though, is how to remove this for cleaning. People know, or you may know from the website, that I'm kind of a neat freak. I like to clean things. I don't see how you would clean out this catcher very easily without having to remove those bolts on the bottom leg, which is something you're really not going to do. So my guess is it's not intended to be removed for occasional cleaning. You're supposed to leave this in place and perhaps just spray the garden hose down through the edge there to rinse out any loose debris, but you don't really remove this thing in order to clean it on a regular basis. So here's the assembled charcoal bowl with the charcoal grate and the charcoal chamber in place. The charcoal grate sits on top of the screws that hold the legs in place, just the same as the current Smoky Mountain Cooker. The one thing I noticed, though, in this pre-production model is that the screws are a little bit short and the grate is really just barely hanging on to the very tips of those screws. I'd like to see those screws be a little bit longer so that the charcoal grate was seated more stably here in the bowl. So now I'm going to move on to the assembly of the middle cooking section and the grill straps. These use the very same identical hardware as the current Smoky Mountain Cooker in terms of the screws on the nuts and the fiber washer on the outside. So the grill straps are now in place. Just a couple of comments about these. As I mentioned before, you can see they're quite a bit taller than that in the current Smoky Mountain Cooker. So That means there's going to be more distance between the top and bottom cooking grates. There is no port installed through any of these holes for a probe thermometer, but it's using the very same hardware as before in terms of the screws and nuts. So you'll be able to remove one of these and you could install one of the eyelets from the Barbecue Guru, or you could fashion your own hole through the side of the middle cooking section. It should also be noted that to the disappointment of some people, there are no handles mounted on the middle cooking section here. I'll have a chance probably to ask Weber about that. My presumption at this point is that, thinking like a big corporation, perhaps handles could be considered a liability in terms of removing this section while cooking. Here's a little closer detail about the handle here on the door. What's nice about this is that you will definitely be able to tell when this door is closed, because when the handle is straight up and down, the door is latched in place. And here's the latch on the inside of the door. You'll notice that there are these little beveled edges on the left and the right side of the latch. That's going to make it a little bit easier to latch this door. It'll pull it in place as you tighten up the handle to that vertical position. So I put the middle cooking section into the charcoal bowl for the first time here, and as I examine it carefully, one of the first things I notice is that I do in fact have an out of round condition. So here's a close-up of this gap that I see between the middle cooking section and the charcoal bowl. I've placed a flashlight behind it here. You can see kind of the yellowish light there in the middle. This gap is about 4/16 of an inch on the front side of the cooker. And there's a similar but slightly smaller gap here on the back side of the cooker as well. So I spent a few minutes taking some measurements of the charcoal bowl and the middle cooking section, and it turns out that the bowl is the culprit. The bowl is 22 7/8 in one direction and 22 3/8 in the other direction, so there's a difference of a ½ an inch. I did a little bit of tweaking to the shape of the bowl, and I have improved the fit a little bit, but there is still a gap here. It's less than before, but this will be a cooker that has some air infiltration here between the middle cooking section and the bowl. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make it much better than what I've got right here. So with the middle cooking section in place, let's see how the water pan fits. Wow, so the first thing I notice here is this water pan has a really much more solid and stable fit than the current Smokey Mountain Cooker. What I can tell here by feeling this is that these extensions that we saw earlier on the support flanges, they angle inward a little bit and they touch the sides of the pan. So the pan is supported on the flat surface here, and then also this beveled edge also helps support the pan. So it's really centered and very solid. I mean, this pan is not going to go anywhere inside this cooker. So in terms of water pan stability and safety, this is really a big improvement as well. So now let's put the cooking grates in place, starting here with the bottom grate. This goes in just the same as the current Smokey Mountain Cooker. Again, some people may be a little disappointed there's no handles on this grate. It's just a larger version of the current grate. And then here's the top cooking grate. And now for the final piece of the puzzle, here's the lid.